Yo, it's me, LFD, and I'm joined as ever by ZCG. We're running this podcast about RTD, and we're watching Casanova with BFB. You're listening to DoD, covering our first show from the BBC, historic drama part 1 of 2 or 3, about a horny guy from Italy. Hello, and welcome to... No, go.
I was gonna say, I didn't know we had Slim Shady in the house today.
That was actually JPEG Mafia, but yeah.
Rap isn't my forte.
No. Hello and welcome to Davis on Davis, the podcast about all the TV shows written by Russell T Davies, or at least all the ones since Queer as Folk. Speaking of Queer as Folk, this is our first show since Queer as Folk that people have actually seen.
I would argue that people did watch Bob and Rose. I mean, arguably not as many as RTD would have liked because something happened in September 2001 that meant that not everyone was watching evening dramas. But I would argue people watched that and thought that was fantastic. No one watched Mine or Mine. I question how many people watch Casanova because I feel like it doesn't have that much cultural weight. Or does it?
Well, okay, so if you look up Casanova on TikToks, you will see thirst trap TikToks of David Tennant.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
I would immediately have guessed that, yeah.
Who's that? Who's that voice? Yes, because this is the first episode of another Russell T Davies series, we once again have a guest, and this time it is filmmaker Bruno Buckley.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on. That's a very nice thing to call me, given how few things I've made. I think wannabe is probably fairer, but I will absolutely take it.
Well, I thought we needed to get someone who knows a bit about directing on, because the thing about this show is you look at the camera work, there's a lot more direction than sort of before. It's really trying to do the kind of historic period romantic kind of thing. Also, since it's one that people have actually seen, and one that it's not too hard to watch if you want to watch it yourself, we thought we're not going to sort of go through the plot in sort of a lot of detail, because before there's been shows with a lot of sort of like intricate character relations and all these things we've got to sort of keep tabs on. But with this one, it's basically he likes to have sex, but also he falls in love, and the two are a bit in conflict with each other. That's the gist of the show. But of course, we will get into what happens. But yeah, we wanted to basically shake up our format this time, and also focus on some things which we maybe don't talk as much on the podcast up until now.
Sounds like a plan, though. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Not that I want to dive too deeply immediately, but I did find it interesting that watching this, I did almost go, ooh, what's the plot here? What's the narration? The show's got this framing narration, and it sort of seems to sort of plot about just sort of telling you different bits of Casanova's life. And there was a large part going, okay, what is the story here? Why did RTD write these scripts? Until it sort of becomes clear towards the end of what we watched as the first episode, the story is this conflict between love and sex. It might be worth noting, so you said it's very easy to watch. We watched Louis shared a YouTube link, funnily enough on a channel named Owen Davis, but not our friend of the podcast.
Yes, I know.
But another Davis, to add to Davis on Davis, who had actually quite a good AI 4K upscale. I mean, it didn't seem exactly 4K, but maybe that's my laptop. But it was a lot better than the Mine or Mine DVD that we were watching in our last little season. But that reconstruction was a 2-part reconstruction. And I believe in the UK, the series originally aired in 3 parts, but overseas was 2 parts.
So it's sort of 3 60-minute episodes or 2 90-minute episodes. We'll discuss this right at the end, but basically I think that the cliffhanger in the 2-part version is a lot better than what would be the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1 of the 3-part version.
I agree. It's sort of the way this first part is set up, it does feel like a 2-parter.
Yeah. But anyway, before we get into the episode, let's start with Bruno. Tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do?
Sure. At the minute, I work in a museum, which is a lot of fun here in London. But before that, I was in sort of film and TV, and then theatre, kind of by accident. But that was also really fun. And yeah, I've made a few sort of short things by myself, and I want to make more of those, as in filmed projects. One of which was a sort of promotional film for the theatre show that I ended up then stage managing, which was a stage version of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So that was very gothic and nautical, and actually stage managing in the end involves a lot of manual labour, so quite physically tiring. But for sure, longer projects is what I would like to work on and eventually make. And it's always good to watch new stuff. I try to watch as much new stuff as I can, film-wise, definitely also in terms of long TV projects. So I hadn't seen Casanova before. So that was a real laugh. I mean, I also had to keep resisting comparing it to the first season of Doctor Who in my mind.
You mean the second?
Oh my goodness, I do mean the second, of course.
You skipped 9.
I skipped 9. What?
We have a rule in this podcast.
Okay.
The only rule is don't talk about Doctor Who, but the second rule is don't skip 9 if you're going to talk about Doctor Who. Yeah.
Which is interesting because 9's actually my favourite. Yeah, obviously 2005 was a very different time, Murray Gold, etc., etc. But I had a great time watching it. It really did. It did feel like, and this will be the last time I say the words that rhyme with Hoctor Rue.
Hoctor Nu, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I believe Hoctor is plays a bit part in Casanova.
Well, it's funny because the woman is called Hayley Welsh and Russell T Davies is Welsh. So there you go.
Well, there we are. Yeah, it's it sort of was a much more randy Doctor Who, which is no bad thing, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think this will be the last time we mention the dreaded show in this episode, unfortunately. The last time we had a guest on to talk about a very limited series that we watched in 2 parts, I think we said that was a proto-series 1 of Doctor Who, starring Christopher Eccleston as the Not Doctor in The Second Coming. Mm-hmm. And I do think
absolutely
we're about to talk about part 1 of proto season 2 of Doctor Who, starring David Tennant as sexy.
Yeah. Even sexier.
No, it is insane how like this is happening again.
I'm starting to think that maybe Russell T Davies only has about 2 ideas.
Yeah, when we get into Moffat on Moffat, we'll watch some TV show with Matt Smith that's like clearly preceding his him as the Doctor.
Clearly just him.
It'll just be him in like 2009. It'll be like 9 months before they started principal photography on Doctor Who.
Yeah,
like this also feels really familiar. Yeah.
What I found most shocking, actually, was the way that David Tennant uses his Doctor Who accent. Because obviously he's very distinctive. He's from Paisley in Scotland. He's got that very distinctive Paisley accent. And here he uses his exact Doctor Who accent, which I don't think he uses anywhere else on television other than Doctor Who. So that was really confusing to me and really did lean into the fact. And he does these little mannerisms that are very much some things that he then goes on to use in Doctor Who, which I found very interesting because he's such a versatile actor that he doesn't reuse gestures in different characters, because that's something I find very tedious in certain people praise certain actors, and I do think some actors can only ever play themselves reading other people's lines because they always have the same gestures, and I feel like David Tennant's very skilled at actually embodying other characters. Casanova here felt exactly like the 10th Doctor, but I'll say no more.
Nice. Oh yes, and also, just before we go any further, Zach, have you done anything since we last met?
Yes, I have. I have left the house. Don't look at me that way, Louis. One thing I woke up really early this morning, so we're actually recording this. Again, I say this every single episode. Louis hates it when I open the curtain for people to peek behind, but we're actually recording this in the morning. We never record Davis on Davis in the morning. Had to get up extra specially early this morning, not because I don't get up early enough to record, but because the season finale of Agatha All Along premiered today. Theoretically, it came out at 2:00 in the morning in the UK time, but I have a normal person's sleep schedule, so I didn't wait up for that. So I had to wake up extra early to watch that 2-episode finale. And I just want to say, people may disagree with me. I thought it stuck the landing, and I think it is possibly the best thing Marvel Television have produced. I said it. So it's double thumbs up from me. That also now will tell you what day we recorded this podcast on, which I'm sure Louis is seething about. Yeah, I actually think Marvel Studios have made something emotionally intelligent, which is a real rarity.
Yes.
But I suppose that's what happens when you get talented creatives in and don't treat them like output machines, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not that I know how exactly Jacques Schaefer was treated behind the scenes, but she seems to be sort of having a positive experience. So I look forward to seeing more work from her. And Louis, what have you been up to?
Yesterday I woke up really early. I couldn't get back to sleep, so just because of a random reel I saw on Instagram. It was from like Waterloo Road, and I mention this because you recorded a short film on the set of Waterloo Road.
Yes.
I was like, okay, screw it. What is the lore of Waterloo Road? Because I never really watched it, but I remember hearing about it from people in school when it was on. So I basically read through all like the cast list on Wikipedia. Insane, a lot of death. Was not expecting that. Also, the school moves to Scotland for 3 series, and then in the revival, it's back in Manchester. Can schools do that? Can schools just move from one city to another country? Is that a thing?
Do they start shooting in another country, or is it canonically now just a Scottish school?
Well, so they did move it to Scotland to film it, but when I read that bit, I thought, oh, they probably just moved their production, but it's the same school, and everyone just ignores the fact that all the rooms look a bit different. But then I was reading the like character summaries, and it always mentioned like when it moves to Scotland, they come and they join them in Scotland, or this person leaves to pursue something else when the school moves to Scotland. Like, just are schools out here moving to Scotland?
I mean, I suppose it's good that they didn't try to completely obfuscate it. They were like, no, this is a different place, because sometimes you do get that, like a real Full Metal Jacket moment where it's meant to be Vietnam, and it's very, very obviously East London, and it's the same like 6 palm trees that they're just moving around following the actors the entire time. Yeah. So I like that they didn't do that.
Since the TV show is named after presumably a location, a road, I'm like, what, is there a Waterloo Road in Scotland now?
Yeah, do you think they just find the nearest Waterloo Road and move their school to it, so they don't have to change any of the signs? You'd think changing a sign would be easier than moving an entire school, but...
School.
Yeah, thing is, like, when it was airing, I was so inept at, like, UK geography, but I just assumed it must be in, like, southwest London, because otherwise why would it be called that?
To be totally honest, I don't know if I ever gave much thought to its exact location, other than, oh, well, it must be a road called that, and I'm sure everyone's having a nice time.
So I haven't actually seen the version where they moved to the old version where they moved to Scotland. What I will say is in the revival, the school is named something else. And then because it's named after, I think, a former slave trader, the students are like, we don't want...
Yes, I read that.
...a colonialist to be the name of our school. And so they have a bank of available school names on the local authority system. And Waterloo Road is one of the choices. So the head teacher who used to work at the original Waterloo Road before it moved to Scotland is like, oh, I used to teach it there. Let's rename the school. So the school takes on the name and therefore takes on the identity. So it raises a lot of questions about names and identities, quite like how in the Navy...
This makes the ship of Theseus look a cakewalk.
This also does very much sound like it's basically a legacy sequel, by the sounds of things, the whole school.
Oh, it is. Oh, it's definitely a legacy sequel.
But I love it because it's like, what are we, some kind of Waterloo Road?
Yeah, very good.
or the one at the end of Fant 4 Stick.
Say that again?
Mm-hmm.
Waterloo.
I was going to say, it is rather like, I don't know if you know, in the Navy, they build a new ship and then give an old name to a new ship. And therefore that new ship that has never been on the sea before gains all the honours of an old ship. So it's almost like you build this new school, give it an old name, and all of a sudden, it's got an outstanding Ofsted report, despite the fact that no children have ever stepped foot through the door.
Right.
Yeah.
Sneaky.
But who knows? They do the same thing in Star Trek.
Yeah. But anyway, speaking of suspension of disbelief with television production methods, let's go to Italy. I think they must have filmed some of it in Venice, like the bit with a canal.
Yeah, for sure. There are that kind of opening chase. Obviously, it begins with, smashing through the window and then some quite long shots of Tennant. The running back and forth kind of crossing frame over the various bridges really made me think of the bit at the start of Love and Monsters.
Yes.
Where they're chasing I want to say Hoiks.
Yeah.
Is the name of the monster.
Yeah.
A very kind of early film slapstick.
It's the Scooby-Doo homage.
It really is. It's all of those things kind of put into a blender, but they're having quite a lot of fun with the crash zooms.
Yeah.
That was a right giggle, because in general, like, the whole thing's a flashback, right? And, you know, because it's Peter O'Toole as the older Casanova, and he's telling it to Rose Byrne. And I think the present day sequences are much more like conservatively shot. It's more conventional because that's happening right now, and it's not in this kind of rose tinted glasses. But when it's the recollection and he's sort of reliving these experiences, and Rose Byrne is the audience for us, you know, sort of she is the proxy. They have a lot more fun with it because it's sort of the fun, wild memories, and they start throwing in crazy crash zooms and sort of weird Scooby-Doo chases. A very fun way to open the episode, I thought.
Yes, and also I think the fact that sort of we see him get onto the gondola and we don't see how he kind of escapes from there, or how the gondola isn't just stopped, because it's kind of supposed to be a non-sequitur, it's supposed to be that embellishment of what must have actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, you have to assume to some extent he's an unreliable narrator, but you don't care because it's part of what you're buying into. You're like, well, it's Casanova. I don't need him to provide, you know, sources.
Definitely, certainly because the young Casanova is asking the old Casanova what he says next.
Yeah.
This is what makes me think where is the traditional narrative in this script, because I find it this makes me sound very cynical about what we've just discussed, but I find it interesting that we're not immediately bought into a premise that's going to last us a full 3/2 episode series. Instead, I feel like we're almost invited to just, as you quite rightly said, Bruno, relate to Edith as that audience figure and just listen to an old man telling us anecdotes that are just told in total isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes on for such a long time, almost going, ooh, what's the sort of the thread here? And that takes a while for us to really get to and really dig deep into the old and young Casanova's psyche there, which I find to be like an unconventional way of telling story through television.
Yeah, I think it's the comfort of knowing that you have 180 minutes in order to complete what you feel you need to complete. You're quite comfortable having a good 45 just sort of be extended scene setting, because you're still learning the characters, and you meet Henriette, and obviously that's the big love and the sort of source of the conflict when he eventually does get married, not to spoil it for anyone. But I sort of enjoy the meandering opening sections because you do just want to see him do some fun stuff, because very clearly he just had a life of doing fun stuff, and as an audience it's quite comfortable to go, yeah, cool, do another weird bit of escapology or infidelity.
I bet you couldn't, in today's television economy, you couldn't get this commission now. People be saying, we need a hook in the first 10 minutes. Which is nice to see.
For sure.
So I split the episode into 5 parts. I'm basically just saying to you because the names are funny. So we've got Boy Casanova, and then we've got Man Casanova, and then we've got Sex Casanova, and then we've got Sad Casanova, and then we've got Jail Jack, but spelt with 2 G's, just to really... Mm-hmm. Shall we start with Boy Casanova? This was exciting because there's a cameo from Mark Heap here, who we love to see. Well, actually, I guess we should first say, so the framing device is that Edith, played by Rose Byrne, is a new servant at this castle, and this old guy is the librarian. And so no one respects him, and when he asks for some dinner, they make fun of him, and so she brings him some dinner. Oh yeah, because I think she does hear that his name is Giacomo Casanova, and so she's like, oh, this must be the guy. And so she brings him some dinner, and eventually they get talking, and eventually he recounts her story to her, and occasionally she calls him out on being an unreliable narrator. And so through that conversation, we get his story from the start. I think the first thing he says about his life is that his mum was an actress, which when I heard that, I was like, I immediately know what's going to happen. It is I guess it's a stereotype. Maybe it's true to life, but it's certainly a stereotype that like actresses back then in the 1700s, they would act, but then, you know, they would be having sex with lots of men. She's like, she doesn't want anything to do with her son. He's this sort of non-verbal kid who has nosebleeds, and she wants to have sex with her next suitor.
When the old Casanova starts talking about his childhood, we certainly want to know the origin story of how this sort of sex god came to be. And then when we meet the actual child, Casanova, who is non-verbal for a significant portion of his early years, you go, oh, this is not the young Casanova I expected to see. There is that scene where he ends up sort of just watching his mother have sex with a random man in the wings of the theatre or backstage. And you go, oh, has this affected his psyche? Will this be the trigger that changes? And then he carries on after his father dies, his mother moves to the court of St. Petersburg. He remains non-verbal, keep on having these nosebleeds. And you go, oh, this wasn't what I expected. Obviously, there's all that trauma built up in there. And eventually, the thing that causes him to sort of awaken is his first sexual experience with this young serving girl, which was a scene that I would have thought played out very differently, because I would have thought going forward that this would be the way the scene is introduced with this girl sort of starting to clean up his knee and then slowly moving up his thigh. I was like, oh, I don't like where this is going. And then it ends up being a very consent positive scene, because she's sort of going, are you okay with this? Are you okay with this? I was going, oh, this actually is a consented positive sexual experience that then causes this boy's great artistic awakening. And I was like, oh, there was less tragedy here than I thought there would be.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes non-verbal king, and then horny non-verbal king, and then just horny king.
You could do quite a good grid, one of those sort of, chaotic, neutral, etc. sort of 3x3 grids, but just for Casanova.
Yeah, what would be the axes?
That's such a great question. There's a lot of options, particularly throughout the episode.
And I think actually being verbality, what is the noun I'm looking for here? Verbage, use of his words, I think is an important axis, going from not talking, and then as the episode progresses, it's his ability to talk and to communicate that has a direct correlation to the amount of sex that he has.
Yeah.
I think maybe we're onto something.
And also his financial success as a bit of a grifter.
Yes. Yeah.
Because also the place where he has his sort of first sex experience. So when his mum goes to Russia, he's then sent to like a boarding school, and Mark Heap is his teacher, and it's very sort of repressive. And so I think it's interesting, the idea that sort of this awakening is happening here in such an austere environment.
And this is where the tables turn, actually. And this is, I think I should have my own jingle here, because I do think it's time for Latin Corner, Louis, if I might.
Or is this still in school?
This is school.
Okay, yeah,
because you've described school as an austere environment. But actually, if we look at the lesson being taught in school, I have an alternative perspective for you.
So let's go over to Zach's Latin Quarter. That makes it sound... They can go do a little Latin jingle for that, yeah.
So, Mark Heap is our teacher, and he's teaching these little boys some Latin. And he's reading aloud, sed circum siliens modo huc modo illuc ad solam dominam usque pipilibat. And I can hear what you're all screaming. That is lines 9 to 10 of Catullus 3. For those of you who don't know what that is, Catullus is a Roman poet from the 1st century BC who is known for writing raunchy love poetry. And this is lines from a poem in which Catullus is describing the death of a bird, a songbird, usually translated as a sparrow, who used to sort of sit in the lap of the woman that Catullus is in love with. And sort of the poem is supposed to be about his jealousy of this poem that gets to sort of hop about in the lap of the woman that he's in love with, because he wants to be the one hopping about in her lap. And the lines that he's reading are literally describing the sparrow hopping this way and that way, and then sort of twittering only to his mistress. And he asks Casanova to to conjugate the verb pipilio, which means to twitter. Funnily enough, to tweet in the imperfect tense. And I just think it's really interesting that obviously you have described this environment as austere, Louis. And I think it is visually, it's very austere. But then you sort of got that interesting juxtaposition with a raunchy love poem, which I realise 99.9% of the audience of this TV show will be completely oblivious to that fact.
Yeah, I guess my question is was old Casanova thinking of the first thing that came into his head?
Very possibly. And I think it's interesting then that he injects that kind of austere part of life with this sexuality, this rambunctiousness.
Yeah.
It's really quite interesting. Anyway, that concludes today's Latin Corner. Insert jingle here.
That was great.
Actually, I just thought of a meme I'll make. Young Casanova is David Tennant as Doctor Who, but old Casanova is Peter Capaldi saying, "This didn't happen, by the way."
Fantastic. So yeah, there is sexuality behind the scenes. So we've got his awakening, and that awakening leads to musicality, to Latin fluency. And it sort of reminds me of, I think I've seen people on the internet basically say, sometimes you've got that friend who is a bit sad and he just really needs one good orgasm just to sort of awaken the chemicals in his brain to fix his life. And that's what Casanova needed.
It happened for him.
Wow. So after school, we get Man Casanova. He is arriving in Venice, which is going to be his home for a while. His whole thing is trying to blend into the nobility because he sort of has this education, but he doesn't have the lineage. And this is something that we see quite a bit in the program. It's especially kind of a difference between the nobility and the performers, people who are there to sing or play music. And Casanova is kind of within that crowd because he's able to use his wits and his skills to sort of exist in that world, much like a performer. But because he doesn't have, that family, because his surname Casanova doesn't hold any sort of gravitas, he's really trying to fake it until he makes it. And at first, he's not succeeding. There is this tracking shot of him walking around some kind of function, trying to make small talk with everyone, and the camera is just circling around him. And I was thinking, wow, someone directed the hell out of this. But he's basically failing. And one example of him failing is him trying to discuss Latin with, what's that word that means like posh annoying? Like, what's the word with pompous? That's it. It's very, very pompous guy. And I think this is where I noticed, because they're discussing what the Latin words mean. I was like, oh, Latin. We should go to Zach's Latin Quarter. So
it's time for episode 2 of Zach's Latin Corner. Insert the crazy jingle here. So the pompous twat, who we later learn is Grimani, he is recounting a conversation that he had with a clergyman. I can't remember exactly who he describes, but it's some sort of high up clergyman. He's trying to sort of get the better of this guy and basically says, why is it that in Latin the word for vagina is masculine and the word for penis is feminism? Feminism is feminine.
Yeah.
Now, this is where 99% of the audience, this will go completely over their heads, unless 2005 really was a different time. That's actually factually incorrect, because in Latin, the word for vagina is in fact feminine, and the word for penis is in fact masculine. So the Duke of Grimani is just completely wrong here.
Yeah, see, because of my knowledge of French, I thought, oh yeah, that must be about right.
Yeah, no, it's actually wrong. And this is one of my favourite fun party facts, that the word vagina, or how you pronounce it classically in Latin would be vagina, actually comes from the word for a sword sheath. And then the word for penis comes from a tail, actually. You'd expect it to be sword, but it's that sort of symbolism. So actually, Grimani is talking out of his backside. He then goes on to make a point about the Pope banning the poet Aristo, who I'm not completely familiar with. It's sort of not really my period. But then that's when Casanova points out that Grimani is talking out of his arse. And so you can reliably take it from me that the first thing he said is also factually incorrect. So yeah, that concludes episode 2 of Latin Corner.
This is now so much more superficial and lowbrow following Zach's Latin Corner. But even in his appearance. Tall, a bit lacrosse-esque, fairly high forehead, blonde. Grimani really put me in mind of the bloke from Good Will Hunting, who will sort of
dresses down.
Yeah, verbally tackles in the bar. But obviously the conclusion, it's the same trope, right? It's the ostensibly higher class, better educated person who's talking complete bollocks, and the more lowly, hyper charismatic character is the one who actually knows everything. But it goes very differently, obviously, for Casanova, because he gets punched in the face, whereas Good Will Hunting gets a date and looks cool in front of all of his boys. So
yeah,
it doesn't end as successfully for Jacques, but it's definitely the same trope and the same sort of interaction.
Absolutely.
Also, I noticed over montage that the music felt a bit like clown music, like circus. Like we don't want to say Murray Gold used to be goofy. I think maybe because there is this sort of chaos and this idea that this is all a facade, and I think the fact that he gets punched shows it's all a facade, because that's not the civilized response. It's like when someone goes to an ad hominem attack on the internet because they can't refute the point, but why don't you add this homonym to your face?
Nicely done. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely quite a lot more knockabout fun happening in this series than in the early series of Doctor Who. Not in terms of the screenplay, but in terms of direction and I think borderline music, like the sort of clowny music, as you mentioned. Also, the whole suiting up sequence when Casanova kind of becomes Casanova for the first time, and he's there in his regalia, and it's very early Doctor Who, that kind of Murray Gold, triumphant, things are actually all going to be cool and dandy music.
Yeah.
I actually wrote down in my Casanovas that piece of music really reminds me of the piece Murray Gold calls Westminster Bridge, which opens the first series of Doctor Who. I thought it had the same sort of upbeat rhythm that track had.
Yeah.
It also, I think, helps that he's definitely using the same synth tracks. He's definitely just reused the. I mean, I don't know how music works, but he's definitely didn't download any new notes or sounds for Doctor Who, because it has that same sound to it.
Yeah, he has the same MIDI keyboard as before.
There we go. That's what I'm looking for.
There it is. Someone has the technical terms, and it's definitely not going to be me.
I was going to say on there. So we've been talking about that interesting direction. What I find interesting is, so having watched RTD shows from Queer as Folk up to this point, so far we've been in contemporary Britain, we've been largely in Manchester, we've been in Swansea very briefly. Obviously now we're in a period drama, so it's a lot harder for us to get access to authentic environments to film in, because we have to sort of A, go abroad, and B, put an element of time travel in there to get that period element. And I feel like in these scenes where Casanova's in Venice, we see him for the first time, those tracking shots that Louis mentioned, the shots they're these very long one shots that really take advantage of the environment that we are in to kind of show off, versus there are moments. So the next thing we sort of see when Casanova is feigning professions, where he's pretending to be a doctor and picking up a client, I think there's actually this one set that we see throughout the episode, this sort of, it's kind of like a portico kind of hall thing with all these sort of classical-esque busks. That is so obviously a set that is just reused and reused and reused throughout, that it's quite obvious when the exteriors are being used and really shown off. And then the camera work is still very clever to make use of this repeated set, if that makes sense.
For sure. And I think it's also, if you have a sequence of shots quite early on that are significant shots, like the running back and forth over the bridges that are unmistakably Venice, if you're then showing architecture that is going to look to most people like it's about the right period, about the right place in the world, people aren't going to be stopping and pausing it and going, oh, is that actually Croatia? Is that definitely, because you've established it already and people have bought in, and ultimately it's not what most people are going to be looking at. And you can always do obviously really fun stuff, like the example I always think of for this is The Third Man, fantastic sort of shadowy noir British I suppose spy film from the mid-century, where it's all in Vienna, and it really is Vienna, but sometimes you'll have like a shot of somebody talking over a balcony and then a reverse shot of someone listening to them. And the street that the listening person is on is in a completely different part of the city than the balcony. But it doesn't matter, because you just shoot both, you cut them together, and no one who doesn't have a, eidetic knowledge of the topography of Vienna is going to go, hold on, that's the wrong street. So as long as you can sort of sell it, it's all good. But I also love noticing when there's clearly a set, especially in things where you just know they won't have had that much money and it will have just been by the seat of their pants. Okay, we've got this, move the candelabras, shoot it differently. Definitely don't use the same wide shot, because then everyone's going to notice that this is, we've seen this haul 4 times already. I find it quite fun when you clock that, because then you see the artifice of it all and you're like, oh yeah, this is just people. This is just people in a room pretending, and there's a boom probably 2 inches out of shot the entire time,
Something I noticed with the sets also was that basically there's a moment where Henriette later on takes Casanova around to show him this basically like the street where she grew up, and it's all like dingy and dirty, and so she's like, I never want to go back to this life where I came from. And when I saw that, I was like, you've sort of just taken like a set and put muck in it, but like none of the other sets have any muck. That made me sort of think back, like, would everything else be as clean as it is if this is a world where muck exists, It didn't look so convincing. And also the fact that it's sort of shot as if they like go one street across and suddenly it's the slum. I was like, really?
Yeah. I want to know what part of the city would have been like that in that period. Because, I mean, obviously there's always going to be places that are more deprived. But as you say, it does really feel like they round the corner and it goes from sort of the Doge's palace to like Hooverville in about 50 yards.
I like that though, because as we were talking about this all being framed by the older Casanova's narration, the unreliable narrator, in his version of events, you would have the perfect shiny streets juxtaposed immediately with these piles of filth. You wouldn't have the nuance. So I think that's that great reminder of this being part of that narrative.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
After he gets punched, we finally kind of meet Henriette, who is his love interest. Their meet cute is basically her telling him that he's going to have to try harder if he wants to sort of like fake it with invulnerability. When she sort of flirts with him and then she leaves and she says, don't follow me, it's unbecoming. But then he's like, wait, you took my purse, and so runs. Yeah,
which is pretty harsh considering we've just established that he actually doesn't have money like the rest of them.
I think it's that don't follow me though. I found that such an interesting line, because she's weaponizing that traditional male and female relationship of the period of he's supposed to be courting a woman. He says, don't follow me, and uses the semantics of courting with, oh, it looks unbecoming, when actual fact she's trying to get a head start on running away. And I really like the parallel between Casanova and Henriette in that he has to pretend to be this sort of noble man to fit in, and she's pretending to be the sort of the silent girlfriend, fiance throughout the episode, when actuality neither of them are really that. She allows herself to show her real self to Casanova, because I think she immediately sees this parallel between them, which means, okay, it's inevitable that these two are going to be drawn together.
Yeah.
But
he doesn't catch up with Henriette, so he just has to go for the next best thing, which is having sex with every woman in Venice. Shall we get on to part 3, Sex Casanova?
Which really is prime Casanova.
Yes. And there's a lot of non-linear storytelling here, because old Casanova will sort of say the headline which is I managed to have sex with 2 sisters at once, or I was trying to court one woman, but she was always accompanied by her sisters, and so I could never really get a foot in, and so I just had sex with her 2 sisters. And we're sort of given that, and we're given the, like, cut to them fucking, can you tell this was made for BBC Three kind of thing? And then Edith is like, whoa, I would not have sex with the same man as my sister. Brother. And so she's like, how did you do that? And then he tells the story, and the way he did it, it seems to just be that the 2 sisters were really quite horny. Like, he didn't really do much. He just sort of was talking to this woman he was really trying to court, and her 2 sisters always accompany her to keep her pure or whatever. And then after when he's walking out with the 2 sisters and she's still in there, he says to them, "Oh, you know, I'm trying to, I can never seem to sort of say the right thing." And then they're basically like saying everything short of, "Do you want to have sex with us instead?" And so eventually they come round to his house, and he tells Rocco to, oh yeah, by the way, he has an assistant called Rocco who doesn't really do much. So I'm sure we'll discuss him at some point. But anyway, he tells Rocco to leave him, and yeah, it's sort of, it really feels like he didn't really say much to seduce them. It's just that they just clearly had nothing going on.
I quite enjoyed that, really, that you are expecting it to be a tale of kind of conquest and him being the ultimate Venetian alpha, and actually he's sort of really sad, and then it just kind of happens. That was a fun way of doing it.
Yeah, he's the original soft boy.
Exactly. He's like, oh, I'm so upset, and they're like, we can sort that out, and then he kind of goes, all right.
Yeah.
What I found particularly interesting about this scene was it was the first part in answering my question, why on earth is RTD writing this story? Because so far, with the large exception of Mine on Mine, RTD's been so interested in writing about the gay experience and what it is to be the gay male having gay sex. So, and it puzzled me why he was the man to write about the most heterosexual man of all time, supposedly. And I was like, oh, those 2 things don't add up. But I think this little scene is sort of RTD's takedown of the heterosexual ideal of the man who wants to have sex with women, because the elder sister sort of explains that men always just want to talk about themselves and they never listen to women. That idea of the, now, as you rightly say, we call the soft boy. I think this bit's a very surface level and one note, but it's this idea of RTD saying heterosexual men are only interested in one thing, and the best straight man ever listen to women and actually acknowledge them. And I feel like it's sort of him as, you know, the homosexual at the keyboard saying, ha 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 ha, aren't straight men awful? Da, 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 da. I think there are other explorations of queerness in this episode itself, but that was the first hint to me to go, oh, okay, this is RTD's interpretation of what's going on, which I found interesting.
Yeah, but then also we get a good discussion, a sort of Socratic dialogue. Basically, so he listened to these women that made him sort of better at seducing, better at having sex. And so Edith is saying, you were doing it for your own ends. But then he's saying, you know, if I was just pretending, if I was just sort of meeting them at their needs just for my own ends, I wouldn't be recounting to you all of these details about all of these sort of things they said and all of these insecurities they had or whatever. And so it's interesting that we get our discussion and we sort of realize that, you know, this, at least in RTD's imagining of Casanova, is not as straightforward as just he was good at seducing, but he also liked the art of it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I always thought that Smart didn't have enough fourth wall breaks, metafiction, and lampshading of the unreliable narrator, so this is good.
This really is a piece for you.
I think that little bit that you were just talking about, Louis, where the older Casanova talks about there was more to it, I think shows that this telling of the tale is actually very sex positive, because we see towards the beginning, I think Edith calls Casanova filth. She says, well, that's all you are, filth. And she has this very sort of chaste, of the period view of sex as something that exists only in marriage, something that God sees only as reproductive. Whereas having sex outside of marriage is all this disgusting thing. And then RTD sort of goes in and says, yes, okay, the heterosexual man, can just think about himself. But also, if the heterosexual man gets it right, sex can be something that can be celebrated, and having sex with lots of women is not necessarily this awful, evil thing. And I think there is a parallel here with Queer as Folk and the idea of men having lots of sex with other men, and the idea that that's not a good or a bad thing, and is a far more nuanced thing, and there's more questions to be asked there. And I think actually when you break that down, I think dialogue is a good word, Louis, for what's going on here around Casanova's sex life.
Yeah, so after we sort of get this kind of tender discussion of listening to women, we cut to a big old sex montage with all the women he listened to, just to be like constantly undercutting everything you've just said. Land of contrasts. One I want to pick out is he says he had sex with the wife of a very understanding man, and we just see a guy sitting in a chair looking at the bed, him having sex with his wife, and I was like, oh my god,
yeah,
the cuck chair, the first cuck chair.
It's a time-honored.
This is where it was invented. Hell yeah!
The sad and, in some instances, unwelcome little chair in the corner of the room.
Really messes with feng shui, but it's tradition. So what can you do?
Exactly. There has to be a sort of give and take. Feng shui versus whatever this gentleman's into, and that is what he was into.
Yeah, you're inviting the ghost in to sit in your cuck chair and watch you have sex.
Precisely.
Yeah, but during this montage, towards the end, we get these flashes of Henriette's face. Like he wants to live up to his own mythology of being Casanova, which now is a word that means a big shagger. But he can't not think about Henriette. And then after a line where I think he sort of uses the Lord's name in vain or something, and Edith is like, you could respect my faith, that's all I'm asking. And then he says, I'd rather challenge it to the bone. Remember, kids, the T in Russell T Davies stands for there is no God.
all one word.
There's no God. I want to point that out because we did a show called The Second Coming about the Son of God coming back to Earth, and it ends with him basically shutting up shop and letting humanity go on without the influence of religion. And so clearly this is something he likes to think about. But after this moment, he talks about a character named Bellino, who he introduces as, well, this was a man. Now we get onto Bellino, and this is a section which, on the one hand, it's like playing with gender, which, was probably pretty bold in 2005. On the other hand, so much stuff in this did make me uncomfortable. Not like the overall arc, but just some of the moments, it's like this could have been done differently. Actually, I think, well, before we get to that, let's say how Bellino is introduced, because this is quite nice. So Matt Lucas plays this like dandy character who has loads of white face makeup, and he's like flanked by these two hunks who clearly have just time traveled from Canal Street, because they do not look period, like they look like extras from Queer as Folk. It's kind of insane. But he's just flanked by them. I think he introduces them as like, here are my new nephews, and this one is from some place, this one is from some other place, this is what they do.
I was going to say, funny you mentioned Queer as Folk. Matt Lucas's archetype here is a period version of Alexander from Queer as Folk.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
With including introducing sort of Alexander says, oh, here's my new boyfriend from, was it Japan or Thailand?
Japan. It was Japan, yeah.
And here now, Matt Lucas's character says, oh, I found this castrato in Bologna and you're going to love him. It's exactly the same type of gay man that RTD is writing.
So then we see the castrati shop. This castrati is played by Nina Sosanya, who I know you love, Zach.
I love Nina Sosanya only because she's everywhere in British television, including Series 2 of Doctor Who.
Yes.
As the mother in Fear Her.
Everyone's saying what a talented man, but he says that that's a woman. It's really weird because Giacomo is sort of clocking him as a woman and then is like really insisting on it, and it's like, why are you transvestigating her? Like that's literally what this is. And he keeps persisting and he doesn't let up, and it's like, what happens if he is a girl? Like what does he expect to come of that, it's a bit uncomfortable, I have to say.
I feel like the camera supports this, because in that first scene where Bellino is introduced, there's a bit where the camera lingers on Bellino's crotch, and I think that's obviously reflecting Casanova's point of view. And I feel like, Casanova thinks this castrato is a girl because he's drawn to her and sexualizing her, and I think he is uncomfortable with the idea that he's sexualizing a boy, and goes, no, that's a woman. And I think that transvestigation that you mentioned for Casanova, it is a sexual thing, which I think could be a cause of discomfort there. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no, but if that hasn't made you uncomfortable, then this next bit surely will. He pays for her to perform to like in a theatre to a crowd, which is a very nice gesture. But afterwards, he begins like undressing her. We'll say her because she does turn out to be a woman, and he keeps, because it's clear he's undressing her to see what's underneath, and he says like, "Tell me stop," as he's doing this, and it's like, no, you can't use phrasing that makes no response tacit endorsement. That's not how consent works.
Yeah.
While he's undressing her, and she's not saying anything, she's not saying yes, keep going, and he sees boobs, and she says that that's just a side effect of the castration process, and then he goes for her pants, and at this point she straight up like says no. It's like no, and he keeps going just long enough to feel something. Yeah, I think this is unambiguously assault, you know.
I'm going to say, I feel like there's a complication here, and you can disagree with me, but I do think Nina Sosanya's character, Bellino, is drawn to Casanova. However, there's an added complication here, and I think obviously there is symbolism here for the modern transgender experience, but also there's something slightly more complicated because of the time period, in that, rather like Barbra Streisand's film Yentl, I don't know if either of you've seen it, about this idea of a woman having to take up the mantle of a man, not because she identifies as a man, but because in her society, in her period, her gender identity does not grant her the power and the liberty that she needs. And here, Bellino has to take up the mantle of a man in order to survive, in order to make money. And actually, being outed as a woman threatens her safety in society, her income, and then also, you know, she's doing something that's quite, well, not quite taboo, but sort of very sacrilegious. And so I do think there is the threat of, she's drawn to Casanova. And I think from what happens later with the fact that, you know, she is attracted to him, there's the idea that she is drawn to him, but also she does not want to be outed because she doesn't know if she can trust him. And I think there's that slight nuance here of, she does and doesn't want that moment. And this makes me sound like I'm justifying assault, which obviously I'm absolutely not. But there is that nuance in Bellino's psychology there of, she wants him, but she knows that to have him is a threat for her. And I think this scene, yes, while it is an uncomfortable scene, is important for shedding light on her psychology there.
Yeah.
And the sort of this dilemma that she finds herself in, that Casanova both threatens and also draws her into. So I actually think it's uncomfortable, but it's a very interesting internal conflict and struggle for her.
Yeah. But I think just because of sort of what this kind of says about Jack's character and what he's willing to do,
yes,
is kind of the issue, because obviously he's the main character. We have to follow him this whole time.
Yes.
And so if we could sort of get that across in a way that didn't require him to do something so bad, then I think that would be better. Because ultimately, because he feels something, he still thinks that she's a man. Eventually, he sort of leaves, but then he runs. And it's funny because they did like the Queer Folk Bob and Rose blurry lights thing, but for the lamps of Venice, as he's running to like wherever she's staying. And he says that, you know, even though you're a man, I still love you, and I still want to be with you, and I don't care what Venice would think, and all of these things. And it's at that point that Bellino admits that she is a woman, and explains that I came from Bologna, and this castrati was going to go to the big city, but they died just before, so I took their place to get out of the kind of the oppressive patriarchal structure, which is a really nice little point. So what it means is basically this is sort of a case of cross-dressing. This is someone who pretends to be a man to get places within a sexist society, but doesn't identify as a man. And so he's basically saying that you should be famous as a woman, and you're very talented, and you should get recognition. And he manages to sort of put on a big ball, introduce Bellino as the woman, because she's a good singer. She does get to be famous and eventually gets to tour, and so he does all of this stuff for her because he sort of loved her as a man and loved her as a woman. We could have got to that without a scene of sexual assault, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, the fact that he learns that she's a woman and believes that her talent is enough, that her sex should be irrelevant, shouldn't have to be information that he learns sort of by force.
Yes, yeah. She shows that she has this like weird little fake penis.
Yeah.
That she sort of uses. And so he could have just fell in love with a man and then had it revealed, and then cool.
Yeah.
Because ultimately he doesn't find out by force anyway, but the fact that he tried to find out by force is
exactly
is not great.
And if you kind of reverse engineer it, in the end he doesn't care, right? Like in the end the point is he loves this person regardless, so he could easily have just fallen in love with this character as a man, and then it's revealed in a sort of moment of vulnerability that actually, no, your suspicion was right in the first place. Like that reveal could happen in myriad ways, and actually him not caring either way could be something that doesn't come out of a sort of change of heart, having had a real panic. It could actually be a sort of more positive thing, rather than having this crisis and then going back on the crisis. It doesn't need to be sort of so aggressive. And I don't just mean that scene. I mean his backing and forthing. There's something quite kind of aggressive and binary about it.
But after that episode, it goes back to being fun. This wasn't fun, but it's funny how quickly the tone shifts again. And then it's like, now he's doing some goofy, provocative stuff where at this ball that he's doing to... Basically, it's like a launch. Like he's sort of launching Bellino as a woman at this big ball. She's nervous to go out, and so he sort of adjusts her dress. He like rips a part off, and then she rips a part off his suit, and they sort of keep doing this to each other, and they keep making sex grunts while they're doing it. Jacques begins to go down on her to rip her dress up from the bottom. Very, very unsubtle. This is a certified old Casanova moment.
We shouldn't forget that the part of the ball is the fact that Casanova has proposed to Bellino.
Oh yes.
So it's not just her launch into society, but also the launch of their engagement.
No, of course, because on the night where he declares his love, regardless of her gender, he does say, "Will you marry me?" Because they had to do it quickly back then,
Yeah. And I think I'm going to say one more thing, because obviously, Louis, you mentioned about that actually what we have is an instance of cross-dressing, and I made the parallel to Streisand's Yentl before, because it's exactly the same premise. And what's really interesting about Yentl is, since it's been dissected in the decade since it was made, is that it still has a lot to say about gender, despite it being about a cisgender character. And I think the same thing happens here, because Bellino, Sosanya's character, still manages to find success as a woman. She's still invited to go and sing around Europe and Italy. Although, very interestingly, someone does say to her, you don't even have to sing anymore. Just by turning up, people are going to love you. And I thought, now that she's a woman, she's lost agency and she's just become an object. And I thought that was one interesting thing, that actually her sex and gender changes. But then secondary, this idea that she's going to go around Europe, Casanova will be her new husband, and he will traipse around after her. And she has this fantastic line where it said, "You would make an excellent husband, but you were never meant to be someone's wife." And we have put Bellino back in the box of being a woman and put Casanova in the box of being a man, but this partnership still requires them to flip those gender roles. So I feel like there is just, with Bellino's character, more going on than the cross-dressing. And she has this sort of space in society that goes beyond that binary and puts Casanova somewhere where he doesn't want to be. And I just think, that's really juicy and interesting. Because at the same time, with that lack of agency, she sort of exists as a woman and as a man in the context of the society.
But then there's a moment where a situation that could potentially leave her quite powerless and wounded, where she notices very early that actually it is going to be Henriette all along, and there's not really anything she can do about that. She very wisely and with quite a lot of strength decides that she won't be the abandoned person. She's going to deliberately release Casanova, like actively passes his hands into Henriette's as they're dancing, as a sort of, I can see what's going on, I understand it, I don't hate you for it, and I'm making the decision to let you go with this person. I'm not, obviously is infidelity insofar as he being Casanova goes and kisses Henriette, but she doesn't, it's not as if she's being cheated on. She's sort of made that decision, which I think is a really great way of, that's kind of how their relationship ends, which is quite lovely.
This happens when she sees Giacomo catching up with Henriette. And they sort of speak in a kind of secret language without any words, because they're so on the same wavelength. They have such the same sense of humour. That is quite devastating to watch for Bellino, I think.
What Bruno was just saying is fascinating. And I think the narrative actually presents Bellino's decision in the wrong way, because she sort of acts like she's doing Casanova a favour. I think there's a line where she's like, "Oh, when was the last time anyone ever did anything for you? You've done so much for me. When was the last time I did something for you?" When actuality, it's a great moment, as you describe, of her taking her own agency and sort of ending this relationship on her own terms and saying, I don't want to be that woman. And I feel like this is, I think, where RTD's narrative doesn't present her in the right, or maybe I'm just like, I want subtext to be more up at the front, because it presents it as Casanova's got away with, and yet another thing, and he gets what he wants without any negative consequences, because he doesn't have to leave Bellino in the dirt knowing that he's done something wrong to her. So he sort of gets away scot-free there.
This is where Bellino leaves, and that little episode is over. And so now that he has Henriette again, they go outside and they dance a bit, and they chat, and she says that we love each other, but we can't marry because you don't have money and I need money. And this is when she takes him to the slum and says, this is where I'm from, I don't want to go back. And also because, you think back then marriages were about money. It's I think it was like a bit of a 19th century invention to marry out of love, is what people say. Henriette, despite coming from the outside, she very much wants to stay inside now. And that's why she's engaged to Grimani, and that's why, she will go through with a wedding with Grimani, even though he's a prick.
And then they're immediately arrested, or rather, just Jack is.
Well, no, because the arrest doesn't happen now, because he then goes to a church and confesses to a priest all of his sins because he doesn't know what to do. He's at real low point.
Oh, of course, that happens first, and then he gets banged up.
Yes, so he says all of the bad stuff he's done. And he says about all the sex he's had and all the sins he's committed. And this ultimately gives the priest he's confessing to a heart attack. And so then he feels really bad about it. And when the doctors come and they're trying to do bloodletting and leeches and all that stuff, he basically threatens them with a gun to get out of there, because he's like, no, I will nurse him back to health. And if he dies, then you can convict me, but I'm not going to let you touch him. And eventually he does get nursed back to health. And what does he get out of it? An entire inheritance, an adoption. He becomes nobility. He did a good thing, but I don't know if he's built up quite enough karma for this.
It's a good point.
He's just a jammy bastard.
Yeah.
No, literally.
It's his kind of it's the apotheosis of his catch me if you can sort of era.
Yeah.
Where he's just being the most successful charlatan you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. And so with his inheritance secured and his money intact, he goes to Henriette and he says, hey, I have money, let's get married. And she's like, yes. And we're watching this and we're thinking, okay, so when is it going to go wrong? Because we've seen old Casanova. What's going to happen? And naturally, Grimani gets him arrested for all the stuff he's done. Because actually, we didn't mention, there's an earlier scene where the way he makes money is because he's a grifter. He pretended to be a lawyer because he looked at all the law books and said, well, no one has read all of these, so I just need to bluff and they'll believe me and it works. Yeah. Like someone needed an astrologer and so he did astrology. Someone needed a doctor and so he did doctor stuff. And because, this is all pre-science, it just gets away with it.
Yeah.
And so that's what is sort of used to get him banged up.
And then he is in a small damp cell for not that long by the looks of things. He manages to smash his way out fairly swiftly.
Well, I thought you were going to say, because the maximum sentence he gets is 15 years, they say. And I thought you were going to say that's not that long for the crimes of theft, defamation, fraud, assault, impersonation. But no, yeah, you're right. He bangs his way out, despite the fact that he is in this tall tower rather than in a dungeon.
Well, exactly, because when Rocco visits him, he says, you're not in a dungeon, you're at the top of a building. So, if you get through this door, you have to get through the next door and you have to keep doing that.
Yes.
And, you're not going to get out. And it's not like a dungeon where you can just dig a bit and you're good.
And then he's on to his Assassin's Creed vibe.
Yes, he is.
Just roofs, lots of roofs.
I like how, he's there for a few months and he grows, somewhat of a beard.
Yes.
I once didn't shave for 3 months. It was a lot longer than what he has for about 5 months, I'm maybe he just has a lot of testosterone. And that's the one that makes you bald, right?
That would be thematically appropriate.
It would, in fairness. He's pretty testosterone-y.
I like the detail of...
Sorry, that just sounded so Italian, testosterone.
Yeah, I think that might be the name of the bloke that is the sort of shared inmate.
Yeah. I was going to say, I love the detail of the shared inmate. And when Rocco comes to talk to Casanova through the cell window, Casanova is telling a story of one of his many escapades to the inmate.
His sexcapades.
Who is getting off on it. And I think it sets this fantastic precedent of Casanova as a fated to be a storyteller. Because obviously, again, the framed narration, he's telling all these erotic escapades to Edith.
Yeah.
And here we see sort of the origin of, was this where he learned how to tell these tall tales?
Bruno, are you familiar with House of Leaves?
That sounds really familiar and I don't know why.
Okay, it's a novel from 2000, but it's like a story within a story.
Oh, is this the one that people say is just incredibly dense and difficult to get through? I think I saw someone quasi reviewing it on sort of TikTok once.
Yeah, I love it because I read it as a good sort of comedy about a really pretentious guy,
right? And
then this other guy is editing it, and the guy who's editing it, Johnny Truant, he has these really long footnotes where he just recounts his sexcapades, and I thought, when I saw him doing it in prison, I was like, that is very Johnny Truant coded.
Understood.
I think it's funny that you've kind of heard of it. I think that's the best outcome. If you said yes, then I would just say Johnny Truant, and you'd be like, sure. If you said no, I'd be like, okay, well, if anyone's listening, but the fact that you've kind of heard of it, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. I knew that I'd heard the name, and as soon as you said story within a story, I thought, I know, I've seen someone talking about this, but I have not read it.
Yeah. So yeah, that scene made me laugh quite a bit.
Yeah. So that's, was it Jail Jack spelled with 2 G's? I really enjoyed that. I just wanted to mention that joke. I thought that was great.
Yes, Jail Jack with 2 G's, yes. So because he's in jail, Henriette is getting married to Grimani now. And I think it's either the prisoner or Rocco tells him that of course this was going to happen because if you don't get married for a woman, it's the convent or the whorehouse. And I feel like there's a feminist reinterpretation of Freudian psychoanalytic theory about this.
Do say more.
The Madonna whore complex.
Understood.
I wasn't sure what it was, so when I went on Wikipedia, it said that, it's actually very Freudian, but then it got reinterpreted by feminist film critics, which is the bit I was familiar with, so I just...
Right.
Yeah.
Is it mentioned that Grimani's only really doing this to spite Casanova?
Yes.
Because since Henriette's been disgraced...
Yep.
Obviously, this marriage has benefit to her, but has no real benefit to him, other than this personal grudge against this bloke he's thrown in prison. Now, doesn't that just perfectly characterise Grimani for you?
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting that this character, he has actually probably 2 minutes of screen time in this whole hour and a half episode. And yet he has got a massive grudge against Casanova. And sort of in the frame narration, Edith sets him up as this great villain. She says, well, didn't you fight with him? And obviously that's foreshadowing to something that we're going to see in the second half of the show. But actually, in Casanova's retelling, it's far more about all these women he's encountering and these women characters and their agencies and their stories, rather than this great male antagonist. Obviously, in Grimani's head, things are slightly different.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting touch for the character.
Also, we hear from Rocco about this engagement, that basically Henriette went to Casanova's old flat, and with a diamond scraped into the window, the message, "You will forget me." That was sad. That's what prompts him to break out of prison, even though that means going onto the roof and looking out like it's Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that's for young Casanova cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But also, at this point, we get this fade from young Casanova to old Casanova, and it's it's so emotional, dramatic. And then, because Edith travels about or whatever, and I think she's come to the castle because her father died pretty recently.
Yeah.
And so she knows what's going on in the world. And apparently Venice has just been collapsed or whatever, or the state has been absorbed by someone else. Something big has happened. And apparently Henriette was there to witness it. And so through this, we find out that Henriette's alive. And that is a good cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if this was 60 minutes, the cliffhanger or the end of the episode would be Casanova can't have Bellino and he can't have Henriette.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's as good of a hook, personally.
No. And also there's something quite pleasing about it being bracketed by old Casanova, that we open with old Casanova and we close with old Casanova, but nothing has changed in his life. Like in the Peter O'Toole Casanova, he's in stasis and he's a librarian and you find out who he is and it's, oh my goodness, that's actually Giacomo Casanova. But all of the change that we see in 90 or so minutes is in the past. So there being a shift in the present right at the end is really fun, because you go, oh, there's actually now a new dimension that this, I don't know if it's now going to lead into, are we continuing the modern day thread or the past? Probably both. So structurally, really quite pleasing. And as you say, I think better than just leaving it with, oh no, he can't have either of his women.
Yeah.
It kind of removes that foreshadowed tragedy, because you're listening to the story thinking, oh no, this doesn't have a happy ending. And now we're given a glimmer of hope that maybe the story isn't quite over yet.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
So there's more stakes, and I feel compelled to watch the second half, which I was going to do anyway. Shall we very briefly talk about Rocco, who, so we've sort of...
I was going to say that, yeah.
We have breezed through this. We've talked about the important things. We have talked about Grimani. We've talked about Bellino. We've talked about Henriette. We've talked about Edith. We've talked about Casanova.
Yeah, we've even talked about Edith.
We have not talked about Rocco. I think it just shows this man is an object and a plot device.
Yeah.
Who in this episode is not given any real characterization. I say characterization, who's not sort of fleshed out as a character.
He's sort of there so that Casanova isn't talking to himself in the scenes where he's at home.
Yeah. It's a shame because he's introduced exactly the same way that Casanova is. He's What's his official title at the beginning?
I think he's like a thief or something. Or
Well, no, he's like a house. When he gets hired by Casanova,
yeah,
Casanova hires him as his
a manservant, I think it is, or housekeeper,
manservant, and I think
because when he gets engaged to Henriette, she promotes him to housekeeper because he doesn't need a manservant, but they will need a housekeeper.
Yeah,
and it's implied that he has been a manservant before, but he actually got frisky with one of the women in the house, and there's that direct parallel of him jumping off a balcony, which goes, oh my god, this is a Casanova-like figure. We're going to have Casanova's best mate who's just like him. And we don't see that at all. He sort of just stands at the sidelines, which is disappointing. And then at the end, he conveys information. Will he have more of a role in the second half? I can only hope so, because that feels like a waste of that character's potential.
And he's a great actor, Shaun Parks.
Yeah.
Obviously also in early Doctor Who as one of, I think, the coolest characters that we get. Because often, and not to do a big Doctor Who tangent, but often the people on the spaceship that they land on are just kind of a bit
wet.
Yeah, they don't really have much to them. But it's great when there's another authority figure that isn't the Doctor. And his character in the Satan Pit,
yes,
for sure is. And at first I was like, I know this guy. And I thought instantly, I was like, I know he's in Doctor Who. And then I had to think who he was, and I was like, yes, he's Captain Zachary. Yeah, would really like to have seen more of that character, particularly because he's introduced in such an energetic way. It's like we've got this sort of mad lad about town who, as you say, is like a sort of alternate Casanova, and you sort of think, I was really hoping it would be more of like a kind of buddy cop situation.
Yeah,
but then it just isn't.
Absolutely.
So,
and it does sort of think, because Rocco's character, we're the third actor from this show to appear in season 2 of Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
And RTD always says, he works with these actors. He just sees they've got this great potential, so he casts them again. And something spectacular better happen in the second part for RTD to sort of see that incredible acting. Because other than a few moments of slight comedy, for instance, when he says, "Oh, should I leave?"
Oh yeah.
Oh no, sorry, the opposite of that. Should I stay? When the two sisters have come round to Casanova's house, we really just see a lot of wasted potential. So yeah, that's Rocco.
Yeah,
and that's pretty much the first half of Casanova, isn't it?
Yeah, that is it. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens in the second half. But Bruno, what did you think of this episode of television?
I had a great time with it. I felt very much as though I was looking at a proto Doctor, and that's fun because you always have to try to, when you see somebody who is in a role that they played prior to the role that you know them for, or that they became much more famous for, you have to try to picture not having that later information. So just watching Casanova before Tennant's ever been cast as the Doctor, and it feels just so obvious that he would go on to play the Doctor, but that's only because I know that. So that was fun, trying to kind of go, all right, well, this is a character that is entirely separate, but leads so directly into the one that we all knew him for growing up.
Yeah.
Also just fun because his Doctor is very much a ladies' man, but obviously it's a kids' show, so they can't really show that. But in this, they very much do. So that sort of felt like watching an alternate universe kind of 10th Doctor. Yeah, big fan of Peter O'Toole as well. Not seen enough of his work, and I thought that was a really smart bit of casting as an older Tennant, or rather Tennant as a younger Peter O'Toole.
It's like Ewan McGregor as a young Alec Guinness.
Yeah, another brilliant pick for sure.
Yeah,
great. I think we'll save our thoughts for the end of next episode.
Sure thing.
So tune in for that when we finish Casanova. But for now, I think all that remains for us to say is thanks for listening. Bruno, where can people find you?
Oh, that's a great question. If people just put my name into YouTube, they should see the bits and bobs that I've made. That's about it, really. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, no, thanks for giving me a good opportunity to watch something I hadn't seen before.
Anytime. Now, you can follow us on Instagram at Davis on Davis. You can follow me at Instagram on Louis on Air, Twitter, Louis on the Air. Zach, do you have anything to plug?
Well, given that we've had 3 Latin corners
Yes.
so far this episode, let's have a 4th Latin corner, because once we've got 4 corners, we can have 4 walls, we can have a new house. And so if you want to get into my new Latin house, you can follow me at Casanova. That was a Latin joke, because Casanova means new house. I know where the exit door is to this house. I will go through it.
Yeah. Let's get some Latin American music to play us out. See ya.